The lawyer's office sat above a flower shop on Tryon Street, and the carpet smelled like rain that had never quite dried. Margaret Caldwell. Maggie, to the two people left in the world who still called her by name, sat in a borrowed black dress with a coffee stain on the cuff. She hadn't noticed until she'd parked her car. She was 30 years old. Her husband had been dead 9 months. The child she had been carrying had been gone for 7 of those months. And the family that had buried both of them, without asking her to speak at either funeral, was about to give her her share. Beatrice Caldwell sat at the head of the conference table without being invited. She wore pearls and a charcoal suit, and her purse rested on the chair beside her, like a small, well-bred dog. Whitfield Thomas's younger brother sat across from his mother, scrolling on his phone, with the patient boredom of a man who had decided the outcome of this meeting weeks ago. Maggie sat closest to the door. She had chosen that chair on purpose. She had learned in 4 years of marriage to a Caldwell that the seat nearest the exit was the only seat in the room that belonged to her. The lawyer cleared his throat and opened a manila folder. He was a thin man, kind-eyed, embarrassed in the way kind men sometimes are when they have been hired to read aloud the small cruelties of the wealthy. "We are here," he said, "to review the distribution of the estate of Dr. Thomas Ellis Caldwell, deceased." Beatrice did not look at Maggie. She had not looked at Maggie since the funeral. Not on the day Maggie called from the hospital to say that the baby was gone. Not on the morning Maggie packed up Thomas's white coats in the apartment they had rented, because residents did not yet make money. Not once in 9 months. The house on Queens Road, the lawyer read to Beatrice Caldwell. The Mercedes paid in full to Beatrice Caldwell. The savings account $341,000 into the family trust of which Whitfield Caldwell would serve as executor. Whitfield nodded, as if hearing his own name read in a will were a perfectly ordinary thing. Thomas's medical books, his stethoscope, the watch his father had given him at graduation, the leather chair he liked to read in on Sunday mornings. All of it folded back into the estate, the way a river folds back into itself when the dam closes upstream. The lawyer paused. He looked at Maggie just for a moment, and then he looked at Beatrice. "One remaining asset," he said. "A one-room structure on 4 acres in Sevier County, Tennessee. Cabin by the county's classification. Tax appraisal $3. Whitfield laughed. It was the laugh men learn in expensive schools, the laugh that fills a room and waits to be answered. $3, he said. "Mother, isn't that Pop-Pop's old shack?" Beatrice's mouth pressed into a thin, precise line that Maggie had seen 1,000 times across 1,000 dinner tables. "Silas's cabin," she said. "Up on the ridge above Hollow Creek. It has been sitting empty since 2008. She reached into her purse and took out a key, brass heavy with a paper tag tied to it by a leather cord. The ink on the tag was faded, but Maggie could read it, HC7. Beatrice slid the key across the polished wood of the conference table. It made a small dry sound the way a coin sounds when it is dropped onto a counter without ceremony. "Your share," dear Beatrice said. "The family felt it was important you receive something." "We are being generous," Whitfield said, leaning back in his chair. "The county tried to condemn that cabin twice and gave up because the road wasn't worth the gas." The lawyer took off his glasses. He cleaned them very slowly on the end of his tie, the way a man cleans his glasses when he has been told by his client to do a thing he does not want to do, and he is trying to forgive himself for doing it. He did not look up. Maggie reached across the table. She picked up the key. It was colder than she had expected, the cord stiff between her fingers. She did not look at Beatrice, and she did not look at Whitfield. She looked at the brass tag with its faded letters, and she thought for one strange, clear instant that this small, dead thing in her palm weighed more than the Mercedes and the house on Queens Road and the savings account combined. She did not know why she thought that. She would not know for 3 more days. The hallway outside the lawyer's office was quiet. Beatrice walked down it without speaking to her. Whitfield followed. Their shoes made expensive sounds on the tile. Maggie stood in the doorway and watched them go, and then she stood there for another full minute after they had turned the corner, because she did not yet know where her feet were supposed to take her next. She drove back to the rented apartment over the laundromat. The lease was up in 12 days. She pulled a duffel bag from the top of the closet. Into it, she packed 2 pairs of jeans, 3 flannel shirts, a sweater Thomas had bought her, the first Christmas they were married, a sleeping bag from a thrift store on Independence Boulevard, a flashlight batteries, 3 cans of soup, a loaf of bread. She counted her money twice. $312 in her checking account, 47 in cash. A bottle of prenatal vitamins she had not been able to throw away. She put the vitamins in the duffel bag too, although she could not say then or later why. She left the apartment key on the kitchen counter. The landlord could keep the deposit. The deposit had been Thomas's anyway. Everything in this life that had ever felt like a foundation had been Thomas, and the foundation was gone now, and what was left was a brass key and a tag that said HC7 and 4 hours of road between Charlotte and the place the key opened. She drove west on Interstate 40. The land rose. The trees changed. Past Asheville, the mountains began to feel less like scenery and more like a hand cupped around the highway. The road narrowed. Then it narrowed again. The GPS lost her somewhere past a town called Cosby, and after that she drove by the directions the lawyer had written on a sticky note in pencil. Turn at the white church. Mile marker 14, look for a mailbox with no name. Last mile is dirt. The dirt road was barely a road. Her tires slipped on loose stone. A low branch dragged across the roof of her car, with a sound like a small animal trying to get inside. She thought more than once about turning around. She did not turn around. She did not have anywhere to turn around to. Then the trees opened, and the cabin was there. It sat against a ridge of hardwoods with the last gold of the afternoon behind it. Vines covered the east wall. The porch sagged at one corner like a tired shoulder. The windows were dark with 60 years of dust, but the walls were plumb. The roof line was straight. Whoever had set this small building on this mountain had set it there to stay and stay. It had, while the world below had paved its rivers and built its shopping centers, and forgotten the name of the man who had built it. Maggie turned off the engine. She sat in the car for a long time before she opened the door. The clearing smelled like cold pine and damp leaves, and something sweeter under that something old and clean like a cedar chest opened after a long winter. She crossed the grass with the brass key in her hand. The porch boards complained under her weight, but they held. The front door stopped her before she reached the lock. It was a single slab of dark wood, and it was carved. Leaves, a climbing vine. Small, precise shapes she did not at first recognize, and then did the curved bodies of dulcimers. The long necks of fiddles, the round bellies of banjos, all worked into the wood among the leaves, as if they were growing out of the same root. She set her hand on the carving without meaning to. The wood was warm where the sun had touched it. The cuts were so fine she could feel them with her thumb, each line as sure as a sentence. She put the key into the lock. It turned on the first try. The door swung inward slow on iron hinges. Cool air came out to meet her dry, sweet faintly of cedar. She switched on the flashlight, although the windows were already bringing in enough late sun to see by. The beam moved across the room, and Maggie's hand went to the doorframe to steady herself because she had not expected this. The walls were paneled in wood, every surface hand-finished smooth. The grain ran from one board to the next in patterns that had been chosen, matched, fitted by someone who cared about the difference between a wall and a piece of music. A stone fireplace stood against the far wall, its mantel carved from a single piece of timber. Vines, leaves, the same small instruments from the door repeated along the length of it all, flowing into one another, as if they had grown there. A bed frame in the corner with turned posts and a headboard inlaid with the shape of a mountain ridge. A small table beneath the window. 2 chairs with curved backs. A shelf along the north wall held up by brackets carved to look like open hands. Maggie set the duffel bag down on the floor. She took 2 steps into the room and stopped. She had expected ruin. She had braced herself all the way up the mountain for rotten boards and a collapsed roof and mice in the walls, for the final small insult from a family that had already taken everything else. This was not that. Someone had built this cabin with more care than anything Maggie had ever stood inside. The carvings on the door, the joinery in the bed frame, the curve at the edge of the mantel, none of it had been done quickly. None of it had been done because someone was being paid to do it. Whoever built this place had spent years here, alone, on a mountain no one visited, shaping a room nobody would ever see. She unrolled the sleeping bag across the bare slats of the bed and lay down without taking off her shoes. The frame held her without a sound. Outside, the wind moved through the ridge, and a branch tapped the window once and then was still. She closed her eyes. She thought of Thomas. A Sunday morning 2 summers ago, the bed warmed, the window open. He had told her half asleep about a cabin somewhere in the mountains. My great-grandfather built it, he had said. I went there once, when I was a kid. I'll take you sometime. And she had said I'd like that. And the weeks had filled up and the months had gone by, and a small artery in his brain had given out on a Tuesday afternoon at the hospital between rounds, and all the Sundays in Maggie's life had gone with it. 6 weeks later, in a clinic exam room with the lights too bright, the doctor had touched her wrist and told her very gently that the baby's heart had stopped. She had not cried then in the clinic. She had not cried in 9 months. She had simply gone to work and come home and gone to work and come home, and the part of her that knew how to cry had folded itself up and put itself away. Tonight, on the slats of Silas Caldwell's bed in a cabin she had not known existed yesterday, she felt the folded thing in her chest move. Not open, just move. Like a sleeper turning in the next room. The wind pressed against the cabin walls. They did not shift. The carved mantel was there above her in the dark. The ridge was there beyond the window, and the whole place held the way good things hold when they are built by someone who meant it. She slept. Morning came in pale bands of gold through the dirty windows, and Maggie sat up stiff and sore and looked at the cabin in daylight for the first time. It was better than the flashlight had shown. The wall panels caught the sun, and their grain came alive, red-gold streaks of heartwood running through darker wood. The carvings on the mantel threw small, soft shadows. She walked to the window and rubbed a circle clean with her sleeve. Outside, the clearing was thick with wildflowers and tall grass, and beyond it the ridge dropped into a valley of hardwoods that ran all the way to the horizon. A hawk worked a slow circle above the trees. A single red oak taller than the others stood on the eastern ridge, its leaves already turning at the tips. Her phone had no signal. The cabin had no electricity, no running water. She had food for 3 days if she rationed it. She ate a granola bar by the window and watched the hawk and thought for the first time in 9 months about what she was going to do tomorrow. She drove down the mountain. The town was called Hollow Creek. Gas station, post office, hardware store, a small clapper church with white paint coming off in flakes, and a general store with the name Pace painted in green letters above the door. She parked at the general store and went in. A man behind the counter looked up. He was perhaps 65, broad-shouldered, with a beard going to silver and a pair of reading glasses on a cord around his neck. "Help you, ma'am. I just moved into a cabin up on the ridge," Maggie said. "I need a broom, rags, cleaning supplies, some food that won't spoil." The man looked at her a beat longer than a question like that ought to take. "Which cabin?" he said. "Off the dirt road past the unmarked mailbox. Stone fireplace. 1 room." His eyebrows went up slow and surprised, and his hand came to rest on the counter as if he needed it there. "That's Silas Caldwell's place," he said. He spoke the name carefully, the way some men speak the names of their own dead. "You family. I was married to his great-grandson. The Caldwells in Charlotte." He did not say, "I'm sorry for your loss." He looked at her another long moment, and then he came around the counter and walked her to the cleaning aisle, and he picked out a broom and a bucket and a stack of rags and a bottle of pine cleaner without asking. He added a loaf of bread, 2 jars of peanut butter, a bag of apples, a tin of coffee, a small enamel pot to boil water in. At the register, he rang it up and quoted her a number that was, she could tell, lower than it should have been. I'm Wendell, he said. Wendell Pace. You need anything, you come down. Thank you, Mr. Pace. Just Wendell. He paused. He set both hands on the counter. Silas was the best man I ever knew, he said. He spoke quietly as though he were telling her something she had a right to know, and other people did not. Most folks up here would tell you the same. You take care of that cabin, you'll be taken care of in return. That mountain remembers. She did not know yet what he meant. She would. On her way back up half a mile before the dirt road, she passed a mailbox she had not noticed the day before. Blue metal. The name Ruark painted on the side in careful white letters. A woman was in the yard beside it, kneeling at a raised garden bed pulling weeds. Gray hair pinned back, a flannel shirt rolled to the elbows. She looked up when Maggie's car passed and raised one hand. Maggie slowed. Then she stopped. She rolled the window down. Morning, she said. The woman walked to the road, pulling off one work glove. She was perhaps 70, perhaps a little more, with sun-worn skin and clear brown eyes. She had the kind of face that did not waste expression. You're the one up at Silas's place, she said. It was not a question. Word travels. Wendell called me last night. I'm Hattie Rourke. I live about 2 miles down from you. The woman looked at Maggie's car, at the bags of groceries on the passenger seat, at Maggie's face. She had the kind of eyes that took in more than most people offered. You eaten breakfast, the woman said. Not yet. Come inside. I'll make coffee. Hattie's kitchen was small and warm, with yellow curtains and a checked cloth on the table, and a wood stove that had been lit against the morning chill. She put a kettle on, set out 2 cups, and asked the questions she needed to ask without ever asking them. So she said, spooning grounds into a French press, "You're Thomas's wife." I was. Hattie nodded. She did not say she was sorry. She just nodded, and somehow that was better. Maggie sat at the table with her hands wrapped around the warm cup, and she found to her quiet surprise that she was telling a stranger the story of the lawyer's office and the key and the dress with the coffee stain on the cuff. She did not tell her about the baby. She had not told anyone about the baby. The folded thing in her chest moved again but did not open. When she was done, Hattie poured the coffee. That sounds about right, Hattie said. That family never did see what was sitting in front of them. Did you know Silas? Maggie said. 46 years. He was already on that mountain when my husband Harold and I bought this place. Silas came down for supplies once a month. Quiet man, did not talk much about himself. But if you needed a chair mended or a fence post set, Silas would do it and would not take $1. Harold passed in 2009. Silas walked down the mountain the day of the funeral and sat with me on this porch for 3 hours. Did not say 20 words, just sat. She blew on her coffee. What happened to him? Maggie said. Silas, I mean. His sons happened to him. That's the short version. Hattie set her cup down. She told the story in a flat, level voice, the way you tell a thing you have been carrying for so many years, it no longer weighs what it once did. Silas had homesteaded the land in the valley back in 1951, cleared it himself with a saw and a mule, built a house, raised 3 boys, lost his wife Clara to cancer in 1961, raised the boys alone after that. They grew up. They went to college on his money. They got educated, and they got ambitious, and they got lawyers. By the time Silas figured out what was happening, the property had been restructured into a family trust, and his name was on none of it. The Caldwell real estate business had started right there on the land Silas had cleared with his own hands. The shopping centers Whitfield collected rent on were built on it. The Mercedes Beatrice drove home from that lawyer's office had been bought somewhere in the long account of things with money that came from it. They took his land, legally. Technically, it was restructuring. Practically, it was theft. He walked up this mountain in 1962 and he built that cabin, and he lived there for the rest of his life. He died in 2008. I called his sons. They sent somebody to deal with the body. They did not come themselves. The kitchen was very quiet. Hattie Maggie said, "The cabin. Whoever built it, every wall, every joint the door, he was not just a carpenter. He was not a carpenter at all," Hattie said. "He was a luthier, the finest dulcimer maker the Smokies ever produced. His instruments sit in private collections from here to Nashville. I have a small one he made for my 40th birthday. It is the most beautiful thing I own." Maggie set her cup down carefully. "Hattie," she said, "there was one in the cabin. Last night. I found it." Hattie went very still. "Where?" "Behind a stone in the hearth. There was a space cut into the back of the fireplace. I felt the seam by accident. I pressed on it and it opened." Hattie did not speak for what felt like a long time. The kettle ticked on the stove as it cooled. Out the window, a bird called once and was answered. "That man," Hattie said finally. Her voice had gone quieter, almost reverent. "That stubborn, beautiful man. I always wondered why he never seemed to finish that cabin. I thought he meant the porch. I thought he meant the roof." She looked at Maggie. "Honey," she said, "if Silas hid one of his dulcimers behind the hearth, there is more in those walls. There is a great deal more." Maggie's hand was flat on the table, and she felt the grain of the wood under her palm, and she thought with a sudden clarity that did not belong to her tired body, that her life had pivoted in some quiet way she could not yet measure. The Caldwells had handed her a key worth $3. She was sitting in a kitchen 2 miles from a cabin that the same family had not bothered to look inside in 60 years. And the woman across the table from her, who had buried both her husband and her dearest friend on this mountain, was telling her that the walls of that cabin had been full of music the whole time waiting. "There is something else," Hattie said. She was watching Maggie's face, choosing her words. "About Thomas." Maggie looked up. Hattie folded her hands. "Thomas came up here," she said. "The summer he was 17. He told his mother he was going on a college tour with a friend. He took a bus to Knoxville and a second bus to Cosby, and he walked the last 7 miles up the mountain in the heat. He stayed with Silas for 3 weeks. I made him supper a few nights. He sat at this table where you are sitting. He was a serious boy, quiet like his great-grandfather. He asked good questions. He came back to Charlotte at the end of August, and as far as I know, he never told a soul. A year later, Silas was dead. Thomas would have been a senior. I sometimes wondered if he knew when he left here that he would not see Silas again. I think he did. I think that is why he came." Maggie did not move. The folded thing in her chest moved a third time, and this time it began very slowly to open. 3 weeks. 3 weeks of Thomas's life, of which she who had loved him through medical school, through the small kitchen with the bad lighting, through every long shift and every Sunday morning, knew nothing. He had come here. He had sat in this kitchen. He had walked 7 miles up a mountain in August heat to spend a summer with a man whose name had never once been spoken in his mother's house. "He never told me," she said. "I know, honey." Hattie reached across the table and laid her hand over Maggie's. "He kept this place. He kept it the way Silas kept what was in those walls. Some things you do not tell the people who would take them from you. Some things you keep until the right person comes looking." Maggie drove back up the mountain in the early afternoon. She did not remember the drive. She remembered parking. She remembered crossing the clearing. She remembered the way the carved door looked in the full noonlight, the small dulcimers and fiddles and banjos growing out of the leaves, as if the wood had decided what it wanted to be a long time ago. Inside, she walked straight to the table by the window. She had set the dulcimer there the night before, wrapped again in its oilcloth. She unwrapped it now in the daylight. Slowly, the way you unwrap something you have only just realized is precious. The wood was maple gold and warm and grained with figured stripes that caught the light when she turned it. The body curved the shape of a tear that had stopped falling. 4 strings still in tune after 50 years, although she did not yet know they were in tune. The signature was small on the underside near the tail. SEC 1971. and beside it, almost too small to read, 4 more words carved into the wood with the same precise hand. Things that hold. S. Maggie sat down at the table. She put one finger on the highest string. She pulled it very gently, the way you touch a baby's hand. The note came out of the wood the way light comes out of a window. Clear, long. It hung in the cabin and would not stop hanging. It moved down through the boards of the floor and up into the rafters and out into the clearing. And somewhere on the eastern ridge, the hawk lifting on a thermal did not turn its head. But Maggie afterward would always believe that it heard. And the folded thing in her chest opened. She did not cry the way she had been afraid of crying for 9 months. Loud broken, a thing that could not be stopped. She cried the way the dulcimer had sung, quietly, all at once, into the wood of Silas Caldwell's table in the cabin. Thomas had walked 7 miles to find when he was 17 years old, in the only room in the world that had ever on first sight felt like it had been built to hold her. If you have made it this far with Maggie, take one small moment now and tap subscribe, not for me but for her. Because what is hidden in these walls is only beginning to come out. And the part of the story I have been waiting to tell you is still ahead. Stay with her. She is going to need you. When she lifted her head, the sun had moved. The shadows of the carved mantle had stretched across the floor and were touching her feet. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and sat very still, listening to a cabin that had been silent for 50 years and was somehow no longer silent. She turned the dulcimer over in her hands once more, and then she saw it. The hearthstone in the back of the fireplace was not the only one with a straight seam along its edge. There was another, lower, to the left. She had missed it the night before in the dark. She set the dulcimer down on its oilcloth very carefully and crossed the floor and knelt at the hearth. She put her thumb on the seam. She pressed. A second stone shifted inward, then sideways. Behind it, a hollow space the size of a hat box. Inside, wrapped in another piece of oilcloth and tied with a leather cord, was a bundle, longer than the dulcimer, heavier. She did not unwrap it, not yet. She lifted it out and set it on the hearthstone in front of her knees and looked at it for a long, quiet minute. And she understood, without anyone needing to say it, that this was not the last thing she was going to find in these walls. Whoever Silas Ellis Caldwell had been, he had not been a man who hid one thing. He had been a man who hid a life. She put her hand on the wrapped bundle, and outside the wind moved through the ridge, and the cabin held the way it had always held. And on the eastern ridge, the red oak stood against the afternoon sky, its highest leaves already gone to gold, waiting for whatever came next. She unwrapped the bundle slowly, the leather cord coming loose under her fingers in a knot Silas had tied half a century before her. The oilcloth fell back in stiff folds. Inside lay a dulcimer, larger than the first walnut, dark as river water. The soundboard inlaid with a thin ribbon of paler maple that traced the shape of a mountain ridge along its length. 4 strings, pegs of bone. The signature was on the underside again, deeper into the wood this time, as if the hand that made it had pressed harder against the cut SEC 1979. Beneath it, the same 4 words, things that hold. Maggie sat with the instrument across her knees and did not move for a long time. She thought of Thomas at 17 walking 7 miles up a road that even her car had struggled with. She thought of him sitting on this floor where she was sitting. She thought of all the small ordinary moments of their 4 years, him asleep on the couch with a textbook on his chest, him eating cold cereal at midnight after a 36-hour shift, him kissing the back of her neck while she washed dishes, and how every one of them had been carried by a boy who had also carried this place secret in a private room of himself she had never been invited into. He had not been hiding it. She understood that. He had been keeping it, the way Silas kept what was in the walls. Some things you keep until the right person comes looking. She was the right person. She had not chosen to be. She had simply finally come. The next morning she woke with a sore back and a clear head, and a small terrible suspicion that she had no idea how to take care of a house. She had grown up in a third-floor walk-up in Charlotte, where her mother had paid a man named Louis to come fix anything that broke when there was money to pay him, which had not been often. She had married a doctor. They had rented. She did not own a hammer. The cabin needed, she realized as she walked the perimeter with a cup of instant coffee balanced in one hand, almost everything done to it. The chinking between the lower logs had crumbled in two places along the north wall. A window pane on the east side was cracked. A porch board near the steps gave under her foot with a soft, sick sound she did not like. The wood stove in the corner had a cracked door hinge. There was no well pump. There was a hand pump at a covered well 20 yards behind the cabin. And when she went out to try it, the handle moved up and down with a dry, rasping sound, and nothing came up. She stood in the clearing with the broken pump handle in her hand and felt for one absurd moment the way she had felt in the lawyer's office. Held up by polite people to a thing she had not been prepared for and was failing in front of. She drove down to Wendell's general store. She bought a roll of oakum and a tube of mortar for the chinking because Wendell put them on the counter when she described the problem, and she did not know what either of them was until he told her. He explained slowly the way a man explains a thing to a child. He does not want to embarrass how to push the oakum into the gap with the back of a putty knife and then to seal it with the mortar. He did not laugh at her. He did not say, "Honey, are you sure?" He simply wrote out on the back of her receipt the order of the steps. He added at the bottom, "If it rains in the next 2 days, do not do this." She tried to pay extra for his time. He did not allow it. That afternoon she went home and tried the chinking. The first patch fell out of the wall while she was still smoothing the mortar. She sat on the porch step with mortar on her knuckles and on her flannel sleeve and on somehow her chin, and she laughed once sharp. And the laugh sounded so strange in the clearing that she stopped and listened to it the way you listen to a sound that has come from someone else. She had not laughed in 9 months. The sound had been so far down inside her that it came out a little broken. The next day she tried again. The second patch held. By the end of the week, she had patched both gaps along the north wall. Replaced the broken porch board with a piece of lumber Wendell sold her at cost, and worked out after 2 evenings of trial and very stubborn error that the hand pump did not need to be replaced. It needed to be primed. Hattie walked up the road in the middle of the second evening, carrying a tin pitcher full of water from her own well, and showed her how. "You pour it in slow," she said. "You let it sit a minute and find its way down. Then you pump steady, not hard. Steady. The pump will do the work if you give it the water first. It is the same with most things." Cold water came up out of the ground on the 7th stroke. Maggie cupped her hands under it and drank, and it tasted like stone and the inside of the mountain. And Hattie said, watching her face, "Yes, that is the taste." Hattie did not stay long. She rarely did. She came up the road 3 or 4 times that first week, always with something in her hands. She pretended she did not mean to leave. A jar of apple butter. A worn cotton quilt, she said, had been folded in her cedar chest, taking up room. A small iron skillet. She said her grandson had brought her from a flea market and would not miss. Each thing she put down on the porch railing or the table inside. And each time Maggie said, "Hattie, I cannot keep accepting these." And each time Hattie said, "Honey, you are not accepting them. You are housing them for me. I have too many quilts. I have too many skillets. Be useful." But it was not only Hattie. On a Thursday morning, Maggie found on the second porch step, where she could not miss it, a paper grocery sack folded closed at the top. Inside was a loaf of dark bread, still faintly warm, 3 brown eggs in a small carton, and a jar of honey with no label, no note. She stood on the porch with the sack in her hands and looked out at the empty clearing, and did not know whether to feel grateful or afraid. The next day, a different sack. A pound of coffee beans in a brown paper bag. A wedge of yellow cheese wrapped in waxed paper. The day after that, 2 split pieces of seasoned firewood leaning against the porch post. The day after that, a small tin of axle grease with a note in pencil that said, "For the door hinge, it has been crying." She mentioned it to Hattie. Hattie smiled at her coffee cup and did not look up. This mountain has more memory than you think, Hattie said. Silas mended a lot of fences up here when he was alive. He set Wendell's porch posts in '83. He sat with Dale Furrow when Dale's wife was dying. He took in the Boyd girls for 3 days when their father was on a bender. None of it for money, people remember. Your last name on the deed up there is Caldwell, but the cabin is Silas's cabin, and Silas's cabin gets fed. That is how this place works. Maggie put down her cup. I do not know how to thank them, she said. I do not even know who they are. You do not thank them. You take what they leave. You leave a little something back when you can. And when somebody up here is in trouble, and somebody will be sooner than you think you go, that is the thanks. It was Hattie who said on the second Sunday that it was time to call Del Delano. He is a luthier in Knoxville, Hattie said. 66 years old. Used to play in a bluegrass outfit in the '70s, until his hands found something they liked better. He restores instruments mostly now. Banjos, fiddles, a few dulcimers. He drove out to see Silas twice in the early 2000s, and Silas would not show him a single piece of his own work. But Del knew anyway. Del has been quietly trying to find out for 15 years what was inside this cabin. He will not push you. He will tell you the truth. You need somebody who will tell you the truth before you do another thing in those walls. She gave Maggie the number on a piece of paper torn from a grocery list pad. Maggie called from the landline on Hattie's kitchen wall. The coiled cord stretching across the linoleum, and the man who answered had a voice like a low chord struck on an old guitar warm. Unsurprised, a little tired in a way that had nothing to do with the time of day. I have been waiting for this call, ma'am, Del said when she told him what she had found. I just was not sure who would be the one to make it. He drove up the next morning. He was a square-shouldered man with a soft gray beard and hands that looked too large until you saw him use them. And then they looked suddenly exactly the right size for the work they had been built for. He stopped on the porch the way everyone stopped. He did not say anything. He set down the small leather case he carried fine tools, a jeweler's loop, a soft cloth, and he walked along the porch railing and put one fingertip against a carved leaf on the door. Stood there with his eyes closed for so long that Maggie almost said his name out loud. He opened them. He said, "Only take me inside, please." She did. He did not move for a full minute after he stepped through the door. His eyes went to the wall panels first, then to the mantel, then to the bed frame, then to the table where the maple dulcimer and the walnut dulcimer lay side by side on their oilcloths in the late morning sun. "May I?" he said. "Please." He picked up the maple one with both hands and held it up to the window the way another man might hold a child. He turned it in the light slowly. He did not pluck the strings. He laid his thumb against the soundboard and tapped once very lightly. The wood answered with a soft tone like a heartbeat in another room. He smiled. "I have heard that voice once," he said. "From a smaller instrument Silas made for a girl in Townsend in 1968. I drove 3 hours to listen to her play it. She would not sell it to me. I do not blame her." He laid the maple down and lifted the walnut. He looked at the inlaid ridge along its length for a long time. His eyes were wet, but he did not blink. "Ma'am," he said. He set the dulcimer down. "I am going to ask you a question and I want you to think before you answer." "All right. Do you believe these are the only two?" She looked at him. She looked at the wall panels behind him. Every joint matched every grain considered. She thought of the small hidden seam in the hearth. She thought of Silas, who had been a man who did not hide one thing. "No," she said quietly, "I do not." He nodded once. "Then let us look." They worked through the rest of that day and most of the next. Del did not break a single panel. He did not pry. He found the seams the way a man reads a face, by knowing what to look for and being willing to wait. The first compartment they opened together was behind a wall panel a foot to the right of the door. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a banjo, the head still tight, the neck slim and elegant, signed SEC 1974. The second compartment was under the loose floorboard Maggie had been trying for 2 days to nail back down. and what was loose, it turned out, had been loose on purpose. Below it was a small cedar-lined cavity, holding a fiddle, no signature visible, until Dell turned it and pointed to two tiny letters carved inside the F-hole. The third compartment was behind the back of the wood box beside the stove and held two more dulcimers nested in a single piece of oilcloth sister instruments. One walnut, one cherry. The fourth and the fifth were in the bedroom wall behind the head of the bed. A mandolin, a small soprano dulcimer no longer than a child's forearm. By the end of the second afternoon, they had 9. Counting the maple and the walnut on the table, 11. 11 instruments, everyone signed. Everyone dated, the earliest from 1968 and the latest from 2007. Dell laid them out on a clean wool blanket on the floor and sat down beside them on a stool he had carried in from the porch. He took off his cap and rubbed the back of his neck. "Margaret," he said. He used her full name, and she understood somehow that he had been waiting until they had done the work before he allowed himself to speak the number. "I have handled 3 of Silas Caldwell's instruments in 20 years of doing this. The most recent sold at private auction in Nashville for $63,000. These 11, with their provenance with this cabin to authenticate them, fall somewhere between 30 and 80,000 each, conservatively. Some of them more. I would have to do the comparable analysis to give you a final figure. But I can tell you, sitting here on this floor, that what you have in front of you is in the neighborhood of $600,000 in instruments alone, without the cabin, without the door, without the mantel." Maggie sat down on the floor beside the blanket. She was very tired. She did not feel rich. She felt instead the way she had felt the first night in the cabin when the wind had pressed against the walls and the walls had not moved. She felt held. "What do I do?" she said. Dell rested his big hands on his knees. "You do not have to decide today," he said. "You do not have to decide this month. These instruments have waited 50 years. They will wait another month for you. What I will tell you is this. If you sell them at auction, they will be scattered. The mandolin will go to a collector in Chicago. The fiddle will go to a museum in Bristol. The small dulcimer will go to somebody's mantel in Manhattan, and nobody will ever play it again. They will become worth a great deal of money, and they will stop being what Silas made them to be." He paused. "Or you keep them together. You keep them here. You let people who can play them come and play them. You let the mountain hear them again. That choice is yours. I would not blame you either way. But I would not be honest if I did not tell you which one Silas would want." She thought irrelevantly that she had not been told what someone she had loved would have wanted in a very long time. She had been told repeatedly by people in suits what they thought she ought to do. She had not been told what Thomas would have wanted at any single one of the meetings about his estate. She did not answer Dell, not that day. But she sat with the 11 instruments laid out on the floor of the cabin Silas had built. And she understood that she had been given by an old man she had never met. A question she was going to have to grow into. Dell stayed 2 more nights sleeping on a cot Hattie sent up. On the 3rd morning before he left, he asked her if she had looked beneath the bottom step of the porch. "I have not," she said. "Silas built porches with one loose board on purpose," Dell said. "Always one. He told me once, the first time I met him, that a porch was a place that should be able to keep a small secret if it had to." She walked him to his truck, and after he was gone, she went back and knelt by the bottom step. She put her hand under the lip and felt along the underside of the board. There was a notch cut into the wood. Her fingers caught on it. The board lifted smooth on a hidden pivot she did not see until it was already moving. Beneath the step, in a shallow space lined with cedar shingles, were 4 leather-bound journals. She carried them inside with both hands. She set them on the table beside the maple dulcimer. She wiped them with a clean cloth. The leather was supple. The covers had not been touched by damp. Whoever had stored them had known what they were doing. She untied the cord around the first one and opened it. The handwriting was small and steady and unmistakable. the same hand that had carved the 4 words on the underside of the maple dulcimer. March 14th, 1962. Began the foundation today. Dug the 4 corners by hand. The ground up here is mostly rock, but it drains. No company but the hawks. That suits me fine. She read for hours. She read about the cutting of the white oak for the wall frames. She read about the curing of the timber, the slow, patient drying the way Silas had felled trees only in the cold months when the sap was down. She read about a man living alone on a ridge for the first time in his life, learning to make biscuits over a wood stove, learning to mend his own shirts, learning to sit on his porch in the evenings and let the silence do what silence did. She read about Clara, his wife dead a year by then, and the way Silas wrote about her, I see her sometimes at the edge of the clearing. Not really, I know better. But the wanting puts her there. The wanting is its own kind of company. She skipped ahead. The 70s. He had finished the inside of the cabin by then, and had begun in the long evenings to make instruments. October 11th, 1971. The first dulcimer. Maple. I did not know if my hands would remember. They remembered. Carved 4 words on the back. Things that hold. I do not know who I am writing them for. I write them anyway. Maggie set the journal down. She put her hand flat on the page. She skipped further. The mid-80s. The entries thinned. They sharpened. June 3rd, 1984. The boys came up last month. First visit in 3 years. They brought papers. I signed them. I do not think I should have. December 18th, 1986. A letter today from a lawyer in Charlotte. The land in the valley has been restructured into a family trust. My name is on none of it. They did it legally. I checked. She closed the journal. She sat in the quiet cabin. Outside, the late afternoon was going gold. She could hear faintly the sound of a hawk somewhere on the ridge. She picked up the 3rd journal. She turned to the back, to the entries dated 2007, and she found him. She found Thomas. July 19th, 2007. The boy came up the road today. I had heard a vehicle leave the gas station in Cosby this morning, and I had a feeling. He is 17 years old. He has Clara's eyes and my father's chin. He told his mother he was visiting colleges. He took a bus. He walked the last miles up. He stood in the yard a long time before he came onto the porch. I let him stand. Some things a boy has to do without help. July 20th. His name is Thomas. He is going to be a doctor. He told me this on the porch last night, late after he thought I had gone to sleep. He talks to himself when he thinks no one is listening. He plans his life out loud. It is a thing I used to do. I will not tell him that. July 22nd. I asked him today why he came. He said, "Because my mother told me you were a bitter old man, and I wanted to see if it was true." I asked him what he had decided. He said, "I have decided you are not bitter. I have decided you are a man my mother does not understand." That is a sentence I would not have been able to say at his age. I think this boy will be all right. August 2nd. He asked me today if I would teach him to make a dulcimer. 3 weeks is not enough. I told him so. He said 3 weeks is what he has. I said 3 weeks then. We started this morning on a small soprano. His hands are quick. He listens. I will not finish it with him. He needs to finish it himself even if it sounds wrong. Especially if it sounds wrong. Maggie was crying again, but she did not stop reading. August 17th. We finished. The instrument is not good. The strings are uneven. There is a small split in the soundboard I let him patch with hide glue and not tell him it was wrong. He held it up at the end of the morning and he said, "I made this." I have not heard a sentence said that way in many years. He signed the inside. T.C. 2007. He asked if he could hide it somewhere in the cabin. He said, "If I ever get married, I want my wife to find it." I asked him how he would know who that wife would be. He said, "I do not know yet, but I know she will need it before I will." I helped him put it behind the 3rd panel on the north wall, counting from the top. Maggie stopped reading. She set the journal down very carefully on the table. She stood. Her legs felt loose under her in the way her legs had felt walking out of the clinic in March, when the doctor had touched her wrist and told her about the baby, and she had to put her hand on the door frame to keep from sitting down on the floor of the hallway. She put her hand now on the back of the chair. She steadied herself. She crossed the cabin to the north wall. She counted down. 1, 2, 3. The third panel was the same width as the others. The grain matched the panels on either side. The seam was so fine that even now, knowing what she was looking for, she could barely see it. She put her thumb on the bottom edge of the panel and pressed. Something gave. The panel did not swing open the way the others had. It tilted slightly on a hinge she could not see, and then it stopped. Held by something on the inside, a small latch or wedge she would need both hands to release. She would need both hands, and she would need light, and she would need suddenly more courage than she had been told she would need today. Headlights swept across the front windows. A car was coming up the dirt road. She heard the engine downshift at the steep place near the second curve. She heard tires on loose gravel. She heard in the way you hear a thing you have been waiting for without knowing you were waiting. The sound of an expensive vehicle pulling into her clearing. A door opened, then a second door. Through the front window, she saw the black SUV. She saw Beatrice's coat. Even at this distance, the same charcoal wool she had worn in the lawyer's office in Charlotte. She saw Whitfield step out of the driver's side and stand a moment looking at the cabin he had been told his whole life was worth $3. The panel on the north wall waited under her hand. The journal lay open on the table behind her. 11 instruments lay wrapped on the floor on a wool blanket. The first words Silas had ever carved into the first dulcimer were still warm under her fingers from a moment ago, things that hold. And downstairs the porch boards were beginning to creak under the weight of people who had come finally to take back what they had been generous enough to give. Maggie did not move from the wall. She let them knock. They knocked twice. The first knock was Whitfield's sharp, brisk knock of a man who had been taught that authority lived in the wrist. The second was Beatrice's slower three-measured raps, the knock of a woman who had been taught that authority lived in waiting. Maggie stood at the north wall with her thumb still pressed to the tilted panel and let the second knock finish. Then she crossed the cabin and opened the door. Beatrice did not step inside. She stood on the porch with her purse on her arm and looked past Maggie's shoulder at the room behind her. And Maggie watched her mother-in-law's face do something it had never done in 4 years of marriage. The composure went thin. The careful arrangement of features Beatrice had perfected for charity galas and family lawyers, and the funerals of her own husband and her own son, slipped for one unguarded instant, and what was underneath was not anger. It was recognition. She saw the wall panels. She saw the carved mantel. She saw on the table by the window 2 dulcimers laid out in the late light, and on the floor beside the table a wool blanket bearing 9 more. Whitfield pushed past her. "We need to talk," he said, "about what was found in the structure." Maggie did not raise her voice. She had learned in 9 months of grief and 4 years of being silent at the long Caldwell dinner tables that volume was the language of people who were afraid of being unheard. She was not afraid of that anymore. "You may come in," she said, "and you may sit at the table. You may not touch anything on it." He looked at her. He had not expected to be told the rules of a room he believed he owned. He sat. Beatrice followed him in and stood a moment in the doorway with her hand on the carved leaves of the door, and Maggie saw her fingers find one of the small dulcimers shaped into the wood and pause there. Then Beatrice sat too. Maggie did not sit. She crossed to the table and picked up the third journal, the one open to August of 2007, and she set it down in front of Beatrice. She turned it so the entries faced her mother-in-law right side up. She did not say anything. She walked back to the wall and stood beside it and waited. Beatrice's hand went out slow, the way a woman's hand goes out to a wound she has been told for years she does not have. She lifted the journal. She read. Her shoulders did not move. Her face did not move. Only the small muscle along her jaw worked once and then again the way a heart works when it is not yet sure it is going to keep going. When she came to the last paragraph of August 17th, the small dulcimer, the split soundboard, the boy who had said, "I made this," she closed her eyes. She did not put the journal down. She held it. Whitfield reached across the table. "Let me see," he said. She did not give it to him. "There were other journals," Maggie said. "There are 4. I have read them. He wrote about your father, Beatrice. He wrote about the papers your father brought him to sign in 1984. He wrote about the letter from the lawyer in Charlotte 2 years later. He wrote what was done. He did not write it cruelly. He wrote it the way a man writes a thing he has decided to forgive without ever being asked to." Maggie paused. She did not look at Whitfield. She looked at Beatrice. "He wrote about you on a page I did not show you. He wrote that you were not cruel. He wrote that you were the daughter of a family that had taught you that what could be counted was what was real. He wrote that he understood that. He wrote that he forgave you. He wrote that he would not, however, give what he had made with his hands to people who could not hear it." Beatrice did not open her eyes. "The instruments stay here," Maggie said. "The cabin stays mine. The journals stay mine. Your lawyer drafted the distribution. Your name is on it. If you take this to court, I will read the journals into the record. I do not want to do that. I would prefer that you go home and that you tell your other son that there was nothing here worth the drive." Whitfield's chair scraped. "You ungrateful—" "Sit down," Beatrice said. She said it without looking at him. She said it the way she had once long ago told Thomas at the age of 7 not to climb the magnolia in the side yard, a voice from a deeper room of herself that her sons had not heard often but had never disobeyed. Whitfield sat. Beatrice opened her eyes. She set the journal down on the table very carefully, the way you set down a thing that has been entrusted to you. She did not look at Maggie. She looked at the carved mantel above the fireplace. "He carved that himself," she said. Her voice was thin. It was not a question. She was speaking to herself, fitting a thing she had not allowed herself to know into a place inside her where it could finally sit. "He carved all of it," Maggie said. "The walls, the door, the bed, every piece on this floor. Your grandson learned to hold a gouge in this room when he was 17. He did not tell me. I am only now learning what he was." Beatrice was quiet a long time. "Take me home," she said to Whitfield. He stared at her. "Mother, take me home, Whitfield." She stood. She walked to the door. She did not look at Maggie as she passed her, but at the threshold she paused her hand on the carving once more, and she spoke without turning around. "I did not know," she said, "about the summer, about what he came up here to do. He did not tell me either." "He knew you would have stopped him," Maggie said. "Yes," Beatrice said, "I would have." She drew a breath that did not quite finish, and she stepped out onto the porch. "I am sorry, Margaret," she said into the air in front of her. It was not enough. They both knew it was not enough. But it was the first sentence Beatrice Caldwell had ever spoken to her that had not been arranged around a purpose. And Maggie understood, standing in the doorway of a room her husband's grandfather had built, that an apology that had taken 61 years to arrive could not be received in any of the ordinary ways. You did not accept it. You did not refuse it. You let it stand in the air the way a single note from an old instrument stood in a room after the hand that pulled it had gone away. The black SUV pulled out of the clearing. The taillights moved down the dirt road and were swallowed by the trees. Maggie closed the door. She crossed the room without sitting down. She went to the north wall. She put both hands on the third panel from the top and felt for the small hidden latch she had not had time to find, and on the second try, her fingertip caught it. The panel released. It swung open on a hinge so well made she did not hear it move. Behind the panel was a shallow cedar-lined space. Inside the space lay a small soprano dulcimer, no longer than her forearm. The wood was uneven in color, where Thomas had not yet known to match the grain. There was a fine line of hide glue along the soundboard, where a young hand had patched a split. The strings were the cheap kind, gone slack and gray with time. On the underside in handwriting, that was not Silas's, in the round, serious print of a 17-year-old boy who had not yet decided which kind of letter to slant, were two carved letters and a year, TC 2007. Beside the dulcimer, propped against the back of the cedar lining, was an envelope. It was sealed with red wax. The wax bore the print of a thumb, not a signet. Just a thumb pressed into hot wax by a boy who had not had any other way to mark a thing. On the front of the envelope in the same round, serious print were 6 words. For my wife when she comes. Maggie took the envelope in both hands. She sat down on the floor with her back against the wall, and she held the envelope against her chest for a long time before she broke the wax. The paper inside was thin and faintly yellowed. 2 pages, folded twice. She unfolded them in her lap. To my wife. I do not know your name yet. I do not know if I will meet you in college or after. I do not know what your laugh sounds like or what side of the bed you sleep on. I have been thinking about you for 3 weeks while I have been making this small dulcimer in my great-grandfather's cabin. And the strange thing is that the more I have not known about you, the more I have been sure that one day you are going to be the person reading this. My great-grandfather's name is Silas Ellis Caldwell. He is 81 years old and his hands have made every piece of furniture and every wall in the room you are sitting in. And his son stole the land that he cleared with a saw and a mule, and not one of them has spoken to him in 20 years. I am the only one in our family who knows what is in these walls. He showed me. He did not ask me to keep his secret. I have decided to keep it anyway. Here is what I think I know about you. You are tired. The people you married into have treated you the way they treated him. You did not deserve it. He did not deserve it either. There is a particular kind of tired that comes from being told for a long time that you are worth less than you are. And I think when you come up this road and open the door of this cabin, that is the tired you are going to be carrying. I made you a small thing. It is not good. The strings are uneven and the soundboard has a glued split, and I am sorry about that. My great-grandfather taught me how to make it, but he did not finish it for me. He said I needed to finish it myself, even if it sounded wrong. He said especially if it sounded wrong. I think he meant something I'm still figuring out. I think he meant that the things we make for the people we love do not have to be perfect to be the truest thing we have ever done with our hands. They only have to be ours. Whoever you are when you read this, please know, I have already begun to love you. I have begun to love you before I have a face to put to you, and the smallest dulcimer I will ever make is in this cabin waiting for you. And it is not much, but it is the only thing in this whole world that I have ever made with my own 2 hands, and I am leaving it for you. I do not know yet how I will find you. I hope I do. I hope we have a long time. If we do not, if for any reason you are reading this because something happened to me and the cabin was given to you, the way they gave it to him, then I want you to know this last thing. You were not given a worthless thing. You were given the only inheritance our family could not take. Love, Thomas. Maggie sat on the floor with the letter open in her lap. She did not cry the way she had cried the day before in front of the maple dulcimer in the daylight. She cried the way a person cries when something inside her that she had not believed could be healed has been touched very gently by the only hand on earth that had been shaped to reach it. She cried for the boy of 17 sitting on this floor with a small split soundboard dulcimer in his hands, writing a letter to a woman he had not met. She cried for the man of 32 who had not made it home from the hospital on a Tuesday afternoon in March. She cried for the child whose heart had stopped before the world had ever seen its face. She cried finally for herself, the borrowed black dress, the brass key, the long quiet drive into the mountains, and the fact that someone, 2 someones, an old man and the boy he had taught, had built her between them, a room she had not known she needed, a room she had been walking toward without knowing it her whole life. She folded the letter. She put it back in the envelope. She put the envelope into the front pocket of her flannel shirt against her chest, where she would carry it for the next 37 years and never lose it. She picked up the small dulcimer with both hands. She crossed to the porch. It was almost full dark now. The clearing was thick with the cold pine smell of an October night in the Smokies. The hawk was gone from the ridge, gone to wherever hawks go when the daylight has finished with them. But the red oak was still there against the last blue strip of sky, its highest leaves the color of struck brass. Somewhere far down the valley, an owl called. The cabin behind her gave off faintly the smell of cedar and old wood and the small wood smoke of the stove she had finally learned to light. Maggie sat down on the top step. She set the small dulcimer across her knees. She did not know how to play it. The strings were slack. They would not have held a tune even if she had known how to tune them. But she set her finger on the highest string the way she had set her finger on the maple dulcimer 2 days ago. She did not pull it hard. She pulled it the way Hattie had taught her to pump the well steady, not forced, letting the wood do what the wood was made to do. The note that came out was wrong. The string was loose. The soundboard had a glued split a boy of 17 had not known how to fix. The note was thin and uncertain, and it cracked at the end. It did not sound like the clear long tone the maple dulcimer had made the first time she had touched it. It sounded like a young hand that had tried. It was, she understood, the most beautiful sound she had ever heard in her life. Down the road, 2 miles away, Hattie Rohirk stood on her porch with a tin cup of coffee growing cold in her hand, and tilted her head, because she had heard just for an instant on the night air a note that had not been played on this mountain in 50 years, and was being played again now badly by somebody who was finally home. Hattie did not say anything. She did not need to. She sat down on her porch chair, and she pulled her sweater closer around her shoulders, and she listened until the wind took it away. Maggie sat with the dulcimer on her knees, and she let her hand rest on the soundboard. She thought about the folded thing inside her chest that had begun to open on the first night, and had opened a little more in Hattie's kitchen, and a little more under Dell's quiet hands, and had now, sitting on this porch, opened all the way. There was no one inside it she had to keep from anyone anymore. There was no name she had to be careful not to say. The boy was gone. The child had gone with him. And what was left, what had been left for her, was a room with 11 instruments and a small 12th one she would never sell. A red oak on a ridge. A neighbor down the road who left bread and honey and never signed the bag. A mountain that remembered. A husband who had reached forward into a life he had not yet lived and had built her in a single August, the only safe place she had ever stood inside. She did not yet know all of what she would do next. She knew some of it. She would keep the cabin. She would not sell a single instrument. She would drive down to Charlotte 2 days a week and keep her shifts at the hospital because work was a thing that had carried her through 9 months, and she did not want to let it down. She would let Dell come up on Saturdays. She would let Hattie come up on Sundays. She would in time let other people find the road. Players mostly. Old ones, with hands that knew. They would come up to listen and to play, and to sit on this porch, and to let the mountain hear what was inside it again. She would not advertise. She would not call it anything. The people who needed to find it would find it the way she had found it, by being given something the world had told them was worthless. She set the small dulcimer on the porch step beside her. She put her hand on the porch railing under the place where her thumb already knew the wood was warm. She did not have to look. She knew the letters were there. TC carved in the underside of the bottom rail by a 17-year-old boy who had wanted to leave a small private mark on a place he had loved. She closed her hand around the railing. She held on. Things that hold, she said out loud into the cold, clean dark of the Smokies in October. The cabin behind her held. The mountain under her held. The letter in her shirt pocket against her chest held. The folded thing inside her that had finally opened was, she understood, not gone. It had simply become a room, the way the cabin had become a room. The way the love of the people who build things for you in advance, always in the end, became a room you got to live inside. She sat on the porch a long time. Above her, slowly the stars came out over the eastern ridge, one after another. The way notes come out of a strong, well-made instrument when a patient hand has finally remembered how to play. If you have stayed with Maggie all the way to the porch tonight, I want to ask you something before you sleep. Somewhere in your life there is a thing you were given that was called worthless. A small house, a box of letters, a grandmother's quilt, a photograph nobody else wanted, a name. Take a moment now before you close your eyes and ask yourself whether you ever actually looked inside it. Whether you ever set your hand on it the way Maggie set her hand on that brass key. And let yourself be still long enough to feel the weight of it. Then come down to the comments and leave one word, the only word that matters at the end of a story like this one. Hold. So I know you were here. So I know you heard. Sleep well, friend. The cabin is standing. The mountain remembers. And the things that were made for you by the people who loved you, before they knew your name, are still somewhere in some quiet room of the world, waiting for you to come and find them.